Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this third day of the UN World Data Forum. I think that we can agree that last evening was nothing short of spectacular. So let's give a rousing round of applause for our kind hosts in making last night a very special evening. My name is Tim Traynor. I'm the former Chief Geospatial Scientist at the U.S. Census Bureau. I also managed the geography program there, where we manage all of the addresses, all of the roads, and all of the boundaries for the United States. I also served as a co-chair of the UN Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management. And that's a great group that is helping all of us move forward on the integration of statistics and geography. We have a very distinguished and highly experienced panel today, and I'm going to go through brief introductions, and then we'll go through some brief remarks, and then we'll get on with questions and answers. So to my left is Gemma van Holderen, and she is from the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. And Gemma has also, prior to her new role at UNESCAP, was a senior leader at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So she has a long history of experience in the work that we're talking about today. To her left is Bernard Muwezi from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Bernard has been really active in geospatial work within his own country, but in the context of what we're talking about here today, Bernard was on an expert group dealing with geospatial information for the SDGs. And so he made some significant contributions to advancing that work, and I think you'll hear about some of his experiences in that light today. János I always have a hard time with your last name, János Dajewicz from Statistics Poland. János has a lot of experience in census work and census operations in Poland. He's an expert in IT with regard to supporting census activities. He serves in a leadership capacity of UN GGIM, that's the Global Geospatial Information Management Group, GGIM, for Europe, and he's made significant contributions in that light. He's also been a leader in the European Forum on Geography and History, which is one of those groups that looks at core topics to advance the science and application of what we do today. So he's had a lot of experience there. Clint Brown, for those of you who have been around this week, you've seen Clint. He was here first thing on Monday. He's a senior product executive at Esri GIS software company, and we'll hear about Clint's views on some of the topics that we're talking about today. So with this session, it focuses on statistical geospatial integration supporting the SDGs and the 2020 censuses. And these are really two separate responsibilities, but they're certainly connected. One feeds or supports the other. But in saying that, they really require, in some ways, their own special handling. Clearly, the census efforts contribute directly to the SDGs. So it is, if that work is planned and implemented well, then the SDG responsibilities take the benefit of those efforts. For a census, the geospatial activities focus around really three principal areas: data collection, processing the results as it's collected, and the third is disseminating those results to the user community. Each of our panelists will make some introductory remarks, and then we'll have a few slides for some of them to share. And following those introductory remarks, then I'll be asking the panel questions, and we'll evolve from there. To get us started, I'm going to display some slides, and I want you to treat these as flashcards because first off, there are too many slides, and secondly, I don't want to really ponder on them, but I'm just going to pick a couple of key points, and then you can have those slides from this session today to use for your own purposes. So let me just start off with this first slide and just say that I've been through 5 censuses myself in terms of managing them and acting in a senior capacity for the last 2. It's a major undertaking for a nation. For those of you who have been through this process, you know how difficult it is. You also know how exciting it is. Many acknowledge that it's the largest peacetime activity that a nation participates in. There's nothing quite comparable to doing and working on a census. Now, I often use an analogy, and some of you may not like this so much, but to me, it's the same level of effort as if you're going to war. But the difference is you don't take the guns, you leave them home. And so you're really talking about all the logistics. You're talking about numbers of people. You're hiring, in the case of the United States, we hired over 600,000 temporary workers for work that occurred over a few weeks or a few months. So it's a massive effort. One difference, though, for a census between the military application, for example, and a civilian application is that if you try to take the hill and you don't make it, you can go back the next day and try again. In a census, there's one effort. You've got to do it right, and you've got to do it right one time only. That means you have to have everything prepared in advance to be able to do that. So the goal of the census is really to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. And that's how we bring the geography into this discussion. This one?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so here we go. You need a vision. You need a statement of objectives. That's what's necessary. So you need to have that. You also need to understand what are the uses of the census. In some cases, legislation is built around the census. In other cases, it's about administering programs. One thing over the last few days that I've heard reference to in one context, but not fully, and that is that we talk about return on investment. You know, is it worth the amount of effort that we put into it? But I think the focus ought to change more to it is an investment. It's an investment in the future of a nation. With the census results, so much more economic activity can occur that benefits everyone. So that's something that I think would be worth pursuing. As time has gone on, in the past, the census would be something that you would take the success of from the previous effort and you would move it forward. You would move the design forward, you would move the effort forward, and you would tweak the edges. You would improve things that didn't work so well the last time, and then you might add a few new things based on developments. Times are changing. Times are changing much too quickly. So the rate of change for us in the statistical community to react is upon us, and we need to be careful about that, and we need to work on it each and every day. This is just a schematic. It's a conceptual model. Take a look at this for the integration of geospatial and statistical. Do this on your own time, but I think this will plant some seeds and will help us as we go forward. One of the things we're working on within the UNGGIM is to try to establish a framework for geospatial information because we know some countries of the world don't really have much to start with. And so how do we begin that process? So this framework effort is to help begin that process so that there's information that can be used for census taking, for SDG support, and so forth. So if I were to thinking about the census, of the fundamental data themes that come out of the GGIM effort, these are fundamental geospatial data themes. 3 really stand out. Addresses or locations of households, whether they're postal service or not, it doesn't really matter. It's the location of the unit. A variety of features, particularly with roads. And then the last are boundaries, whether those boundaries are used to manage the census or whether they're used to actually report the results from the census. And they may not necessarily be the same thing. All right, I'm just going to buzz through. So we have different data types, we have stakeholders, we have different geographies. Here's a simple map. There's not much complex about this. It tells you what your assignment area is and what's not your assignment area. These are the kinds of things to ensure coverage and completeness of a census. That way no one's left out, and that way management controls can be put into place. Hierarchies, different relationships, I'm just going to buzz right through these. the SDGs are there. And let's look at just, I want to make one statement here. Let's see, gradual adoption. Okay, so over time, the evolution of technology, we're responding to that with time. So in the 2010 census in the United States, we did that census, people responded to the census using paper and pencil. United States of America, paper and pencil. Okay, we're not doing that in 2020. So that's the evolution, but it takes that long to prepare for it because, again, you have to get it right. You have to ensure that things work correctly. Okay, and let's just move out. Okay, so that's me for that, and now I'm going to pass it over to Gemma. Oh, sorry, you're up there. Okay. That's when your turn. That's when your turn comes.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you very much to Greg Scott, who is in charge of the geospatial work at the United Nations Statistics Division, for putting together this session today, and to our hosts. Again, that was a fantastic evening last night. Thank you very much. So I'm here today to talk about statistical geospatial integration, and there's two themes. It's about supporting SDGs and supporting population censuses. And I'm going to try and share some of the work that's happening in Asia and the Pacific. And as Tim said, prior to coming to the United Nations, I worked for the Australian Bureau of Statistics, so I'll bring in a couple of examples from Australia as well. But I just wanted to highlight that the session actually was under the heading of building trust in data and statistics. And trust has been a bit of a theme of this couple of days. So my presentation is definitely focused on how do we make sure that when we do integrate statistical and geospatial information, we maintain the trust in our business. So first of all, with a focus on population censuses. So why integrate statistics and geospatial information for your population census? And I've put on here 8 reasons why I think integrating statistical and geospatial information is of value. And I'm going to go into a couple of these in a minute, but I just wanted to highlight the top one. And we've just heard from Tim about the importance of population censuses for building a nation. And I think that actually building in geographic and geospatial and with our censuses gives us an opportunity here. And I remember heading to Brazil, Rio and the ISI. And at the time, the Brazilian country was rolling out their 2010 census. I remember the chief statistician at the time in Brazil spoke about how they were rolling out electronic data collection for the very first time in their population census. But to roll out electronic collection in their census, they had to actually roll out mobile phone towers to the country. And they had to also roll out the technology to the schools, to the classrooms, to the teachers. So this census became an actual big nation-building exercise for Brazil. Mobile phone towers, technology, skill setting, computers, as well as the census. So I totally agree with Tim here that censuses are a nation-building exercise. And on that slide here, you'll see not only is it nation-building, but it builds resilience, it enhances service offerings, it strengthens the national statistical system, it strengthens partnerships, it modernises infrastructure, it builds skills, and it transforms operations. So let me just talk about 2 of these. This is an example where we've built GIS skills and we have transformed operations. And on the left there, we have an example from Indonesia where the geospatial information was used for block listing for our census. Now, this is a pretty rudimentary thing, and you might say, oh, this is great, but this is a great change. This building of the skills, getting the technology, working out how to use it, and modernising how we do our operations in census is a really great use of GIS. On the right-hand side there, we have an example from the Philippines, where GIS and GIS technology has been used for workflows in the population census. Now, when I go around Asia and Pacific, and I've just spoken with many of the chief statisticians in Southeast Asia, a lot of them are using GIS in both the operations and the workflow management. And it is becoming more and more common. And I'd just like to say here that the support of ESRI and their census modernisation program is presenting new opportunities across Asia and the Pacific, and I think it's really great that we've got ESRI and the work of them on modernising censuses. I'd now like to give you an example, this one comes from Australia, of building website skills and enhancing a service offering. And I unashamedly are putting up the most boring picture of a map here that you will have seen from this entire conference. I chose to put up the most boring picture of a map, and this is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics website. And I wanted to put up this fairly boring map up here because this map actually, and this website, actually symbolises a lot of things. First of all, it symbolised a modernisation of how we delivered our statistics from the Bureau of Statistics. This took a lot of time of breaking down the silos within our organisation between the communication dissemination people, from the geography people, from the data people sitting in the economic statistics area, the social statistics area. So this actually process here broke down a lot of silos in our organisation. Secondly, it really made us think about what technology do we need for our dissemination platform. Should we go with Google Maps? Should we go with a different product? How do we do the interaction? How do we do the visualisation? These were very difficult conversations to have. And when you're working in an organisation that already has a dissemination platform and you need to modernise your platform, I'm sure I don't need to explain the difficulties that that can have. The other thing you'll notice on this map here is boundaries. So we delineate here between the 8 states and territories of the Australia. Now, putting boundaries on a map you would think would be quite straightforward. And maybe at the national level it is, but at the regional or the global level, putting boundaries on countries can be very challenging. And this is some work that's being done that is still underway. This map, if you go and look through all these little location buttons there, brings together data sources. So you go into this map and you say, okay, I want to know what's happening in New South Wales. I therefore want to know what's happening in Sydney. I want to know what's happening within, say, the Wentworth electoral boundary, where we've just had an election in Australia. And this brings up a lot of the data. And it's data across different data types. Some of the data comes from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, say, for instance, from our population census. Some of the data, though, comes from administrative data sources. Now, this actually was a real leadership piece for the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and I was either fortunate or unfortunate at the time to be responsible for this. And the leadership piece here was using the administrative data. I had to be assured that the confidentiality provisions were appropriate. So building trust in this product, I needed to make sure that appropriate confidentiality had been applied to the administrative data, but the administrative data had been given to the Australian Bureau of Statistics already at the aggregate level. So I didn't know how it had been confidentialised, what rules had been applied and all the rest of it, but I was responsible for disseminating this. So it brings in a whole range of issues of how do you partner with the other agencies, how do you know what the confidentiality provisions that have been applied for, can I be assured that they've been applied appropriately by staff that weren't my own staff? So these were some really big leadership challenges. So very happy to put up a very boring map, very boring slide, but I wanted to outline to you, this actually was a very big modernisation transformation area for our organisation. The third example I want to show here was what does a population census and integrating with geospatial data, what does it do? Now, this is some new work that's happening in the data integration space. So many countries are integrating business data to look at economic conditions. They're integrating tax data with business survey data, with administrative data sources to get a better understanding of what's happening in the economy and in the business sector. That's the bottom blue bubble. There's also a lot of work happening in integrating data sources in the people dimension in the yellow bubble there. So what's happening in education, in health, and various sectors. And then at the top level, we're also doing a lot of integrating about what's happening with water, with land, with emissions, with wastes. But where we need to get to is actually bringing all three of those dimensions together. So we need to understand the people and the economy and the environment at the same time. And the 2030 agenda is definitely about bringing these things together. So the question becomes, how do you integrate across the three domains? And location and geospatial information is your enabler there. And we have an expert group, Tim mentioned the United Nations Geospatial, Global Geospatial Information Management Committee. That committee actually established an expert group that has built a global framework for the integration of statistical geospatial information. Myself was on it, Yunus was on it, and what this has done is provided us with some principles and an endorsed global framework on how do you bring together geospatial and statistical information to be able to connect economic, social and environmental data. I would certainly commend you to have a look at that. So I'd now like to talk to integrating statistical and geospatial information in support of the SDGs. Now for this slide, I went back to a really quite a great document that was written in 2016. It's about 260 pages if you'd like to have a browse. And what this document is, it is a document that presents the views of the SDG custodians, the custodians of the global indicators that are in Tier 3. So you will have heard this tier system. Tier 1's accepted methodology, Tier 2 is under development, Tier 3 we need to develop. So there's a document written in 2016 that said, for the Tier 3 indicators, here's how we can develop a methodology and the data sources. And if you browse through those 260 pages, the custodians of these indicators in SDG 1, 6, 8, 11, 14, 15 and 17 all said that they were planning to use satellite data or remote sensing data or some form of geospatial information. So we've got an opportunity here not only to use geospatial and statistical information for Tier 1 and Tier 2, but here was where we could use it for Tier 3 methodologies. I then went scouring looking for some examples of where geospatial and statistical information has been used in production for official statistics for the SDGs. And there is lots of examples out there of where we're trialling the use of geospatial data for the SDGs. There's some good examples. We have some from UNEP in the area of SDG 6. We have some good examples emerging in other areas. But I have to admit, I would really look to you and our partners to please let's share some examples of where the geospatial information is being used not for research, not for a trial, but actually in production and in production for official statistics. And I think we have 7 areas there where there's some really great opportunities to explore the use of geospatial and statistical information for SDG indicators. So this is a great opportunity and I look forward to hearing from you about where we can use this methodology. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Bernard, please, if you would.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, trainer, for the invitation. I give you and I bring you greetings from Uganda. That is in eastern part of Africa. It's a developing country. And my talk today, I would wish to bring across the experience of what we are going through in terms of bringing ourselves on board on SDGs, but also on the efforts to start our preparations for the census, which is 2023 in our case. I want to reiterate that the efforts for integrating statistics and geography or geospatial information has been quite a long journey and not an easy one, right from 2000, to be specific. The efforts of the country was that it was important to cause geography and statistics to start talking together. Of course, before they were in different households, but 2000, Geoinformation Services as a division and as a function in the National Statistical System was introduced, and a division was established in the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, which is the National Census Office of Uganda. And from that time, we committed ourselves as the people that were recruited at the time, because I was coming from lands as a practicing GIS officer in the Ministry of Lands and Surveys. And I was tasked to cause an everlasting trust relationship whereby the statisticians would be able to be comfortable about how they will rely on us in terms of what we are to bring into the organization, and to cause sincerity kind of insights and prove a competence that we are of use to statistics. And through this, we encouraged ourselves too, and created credences, and we assured, and we further committed ourselves. We documented things, we wrote papers, we made presentations, and now we are much better. We are indeed in the house, and we are treated as children and also heirs in the products of the statistical system. Because of this not established, and I think it is possibly an everlasting one in our case, we have also found, and we have had a lot of lessons to learn, but also there have always also been gives and takes. This time around, in terms of the census, I want to mention that we would wish to take advantage of the Esri Census GIS official statistics program of modernizing this activity, and because Esri has also been a part of our supplier, our provider of technical assistance in one or another of technologies for quite a long time, and we're excited to hear that there is this program that we can build on, especially for developing countries, whereby technologies are known and out on the web, information and documentation is available, can be downloaded, can be viewed, can be read, and we have also have a lot of technical know-how. Many of our guys have trained in many other countries in geospatial systems, but sometimes the funding is a bit miserable, and you find we are not able to walk the talk. We talk, but sometimes what we do is not coming up. So we are really indeed very excited about Esri's concern and bring on board this program, and we have already applied and will benefit from it. From our own efforts, we think geospatial integration into statistics is possible, especially if the agencies have taken steps to cause the use of fundamental geospatial infrastructure and geocoding in their statistical production processes. For us, also at the Bureau, we have carefully tried to geocode all our units in recording and data collection of our statistics. And also, we have fairly built up, they are not robust, built up some geodatabases, which are not so excellent, but they can do the work, given that some of our countries are a bit small, although they are increasing in population. But also, we think it is possible to do good work if the common geographies for dissemination of statistics are taken care of carefully in the whole planning process. Because, as you know, geodynamics, where you are able to disaggregate even a geographical frame downwards to the lowest unity possible of interest, whether village or an information area, and also to be concerned about the aggregation of data upwards so that you can serve the needs of the local councils, the local municipalities, but also build up a case or indicator or numbers to the sub-regional and also even to the national level. This we have done, and it has also enabled us to come out with very good products that have fairly enabled us to be part of the expert group at the UN level of the SDGs, as you have heard in the introduction. And also we want to do more. However, that said, there are still, of course, some other things that completely are geographical and some things that are completely very statistical. But the divide is not discouraging. There's still a lot to share, interoperability and standards and so on. They can be different, but there's a lot of understanding that can be done, and also work can go on. The other great thing, I think, if the trust, this note code has to be everlasting, then we think the accessibility and the usability of geospatial enabled statistics should be a very key area to be concerned about. Because once you marry statistics and geography, then the dissemination, you could claim you are disseminating geography when you go as a geographer, but then you can go, so that would be statistical geography, so to say. But again, if you are going out as a statistician, then you could again disseminate the same information, but wearing the hat of geospatially enabled statistics. It will be the same thing, only that it will depend on who is the supplier and who is the receiver. And because of this, in Uganda, we have therefore been able to treat and document and cause our geospatial information, that is the georeference statistics, therefore, to be a public good, which I pray that to the wider community, especially of the NSOs in Africa and developing countries, it is a good thing to open up our data sets, to georeference it, and to make it available to the users and cause a lot of downloads and sharing platforms on our websites. And if you later on could visit our Uganda Bureau of Statistics website, ubos.org, then you could see that we have portals that do download these statistics in a georeferenced form as layers, so to say, as GIS work or products. And the census of 2023 in our case is therefore going to use a lot of the technologies, as I have mentioned, that we jump on board of the ESRI program. But even if it delayed, we are still committed. We'll be able to use a lot of copy systems, computer-assisted stuff. And we also think we will do it much faster. And also we are considering some other parts that could possibly have been corrected geospatially. We may not need to duplicate a lot statistically if we are looking for the nearest health unit, the nearest. This we already have the location, and we may not necessarily need to overburden the questionnaires because there are too many questions to be asked and to be discussed in the census questionnaire, as the team mentioned. Therefore, we think we could also save on the responses. By the way, as you know, increasingly, people become too busy in the census, and they don't want overburdened long questionnaires. So there is already a lot of non-response at this level. So we think also geography, or this integration, or this marriage of geographies into statistics could also help out and already map out and provide answers even for being asked in some of the questions, and therefore we treat some of those other questions that may not necessarily be corrected geographically, so they are the ones that the respondents could answer, and that could possibly reduce the burden on the administration and management of the questionnaires. Lastly, if I may touch a little bit on the SDGs, my thing was Uganda in SDGs and SDGs in Uganda. As you have heard, Uganda in SDGs, we are there. We are on the UN expert group group meetings. We have a representative who is the SDG contact person at the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, and therefore also for Uganda. Also, we have been, by grace of God, we also are part of the expert working group on geospatial, as you heard, and we have also had a lot of lessons from there. So that is how far we are, and we have learned a lot, and we have been given some tasks to pilot things and to write little small papers and to write out some methodologies, and through this we have learned, and when we take it back home, we have also been able to talk and also cause a lot of smaller groups to begin. The take from here to you is that we need to cause the different groupings, the different thematic areas in our organizations, in our countries, to challenge them to take up some of the tasks in some of the indicators, whether T3, Tier 2, Tier 3, or Tier 1, and they start doing some work. Because if we have to mention that we don't want to be left behind, then we cannot be seated, and we think that people will sit with us, and we call that one a movement. It can't. It is a movement whereby you have to get up from your seat, and you take one step and another, and then you could go slowly behind. People could wait a little bit, could encourage you, but we need to start going forward. Therefore, that is the take I want to challenge you on, that let's cause our other colleagues and other agencies to start thinking some of these SDGs and goals and targets in their areas. About the SDG in Uganda, that was the Uganda in SDGs. The SDGs in Uganda, we have very many working groups. The government has tasked the Uganda Bureau of Statistics to coordinate, but our arrangement is as follows. It is quick to understand, but it is a bit detailed in form. We have national standard indicators. These are the priority indicators of the country based on the manifestos of the running government, but we also have a national development plan for 5 years. So it is like cascading, but in a way, kind of one being mapped on another. Priority areas mapped on the national development indicators, and these are mapped on the sub-regional East African community kind of big agenda, then the regional one, then they are mapped on the Africa Agenda 2063 and its prosperity areas and themes, and these are mapped on to the SDGs Agenda 2030. This is the approach that Uganda is using, because we cannot have just front SDGs only. We have our own priority areas, and therefore, that's how it has been mapped out. So that the little work that you do for the national priority areas, they contribute to the other agenda hierarchies, as I have mentioned. And finally, Uganda is the fast growing population, 3%, and I think we are one of the fastest growing populations in the whole world. This is also a drive, and it's a challenge to us, but we are taking advantage of this to cause to have the talk that everybody should come up and quickly start doing something, because the situation needs a lot of hands, and therefore together we are able to make it. Let me stop there and thank you for listening to me, and we'll attend to other questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernard. Janusz, please.
Good morning to everybody. Dear colleagues, it's a big pleasure to be here in such a marvelous place. Everything happens somewhere, this time in Dubai. So I representing Statistics Poland. If somebody don't know where the geographical location is of Poland, it is a very beautiful country between Germany and Russia. So let me introduce some issues concerning linkage and integration of statistical data with geospatial data. I want to introduce some experience concerning Polish and European approaching for on common geographies for dissemination of census data and SDG indicators. Regarding usage of geospatial data in statistics, as Polish statistics, we have some practical experiences concerning linkage of statistical data with geospatial data. First of all, as Tim said, the minimum information, geospatial information to conduct geospatial statistics is to have address point database covering all addresses in country together with XY coordinates of each address. It is the best situation. And also administrative and statistical division boundaries supported by statistical regions and census areas like enumeration areas. So it is a minimum, it is a base for developing geospatial information. Such a frame is necessary for publishing survey results on maps in any special division. I mean in administrative division, statistical division, grid, and any chosen area, because we can aggregate unit data with XY coordinates. So collecting data in statistical surveys with the precision of XY coordinates will allow a broad use of geostatistical analysis for handling outputs of statistical information. It is also possible to create a base of special microdata, enabling carrying out special analysis of various phenomena concerning, for example, demography, I mean the average distance between children and parents, residents, commuting to work, school, distance to a hospital. Also in urbanization and planning, for example, useful in determining the boundaries of urban agglomerations, metropolis, and drawing up a land development. Also in agriculture and environment, analyzes the structure of crops, environment pollution, There's a lot of possibilities. There are only a few examples. In 2011 census in Poland, we used GIS technology to monitor field activities of our enumerators. We had 18,000 enumerators and automatically collected all necessary data about their activity in field. Such monitoring was supported by GIS and GPS technology and digital maps. In last census, we didn't use any piece of paper, even for questionnaires and map. We abandoned a paper at all. And there is a good example because we prepare a special application to supporting supervisor and dispatchers to monitor activity in field. And some people like tables like this. This consists a lot of information about activity in field. But one picture worth 1,000 words, because the same information we can present in such manner. It is exactly the same information. And this allowed our supervisors to monitor not activity of enumerators in field, but it was possible to check that data are collected in the proper addresses. It is very important, not only for monitoring activity in field, but also enhance quality of collected data, because we're sure that data was collected in the proper point. It is very important, because on paper you can write everything. And to achieve this, the strong cooperation between statistics and mapping agency is crucial for developing geospatial statistics. And for better understanding both worlds, I mean geodetic world and statistic world, and statistical approach to territory division, the Polish statistics prepared a 10-level model for comparison of these two systems and find the differences to support this discussion. This discussion we provided 10 years, but we have to finally point what is the differences, what's the issue. So this model is for better understanding geodetical system and statistics system, because there are some differences. This question mark mainly, especially regarding such components like polygon, line, and grid. At the same administrator level, we use this, in Europe it is 5 levels normally, and both statistical and geodetic system use this in the same and also definition also the same. So the problem is in we pointed to level 6, because Geodesy use cadastral units and cadastral parcels, and statistics use units, statistical units or regions of enumeration area. They differ. And we're discussing about this 10 years, how to integrate, harmonize, combine this. And this is a main point of our discussion. Maybe it will be possible to integrate this two systems. Also, a colleague from Australia prepared a global statistical geospatial framework for supporting integration of statistical and geospatial systems. There are 5 levels and 5 principles how we have to do concerning usage of geospatial information for statistical needs. There are, from the base, we have to use fundamental geospatial infrastructure and geocoding system. It's coming mainly from mapping agencies and cadastral agencies. And we in the second level, we have to geocode unit record data, statistical data, and in common environment, IT environment. And finally, we have to prepare a common geographies for dissemination of statistical data on the base of this bottom level. Fourth one, it is about metadata. In Europe, fortunately, Inspire directive regulates this level, and at the top, we can construct geoportals. Some countries start from top, constructing geoportals. And what about this layer below? And this 10-level model can support this 3 bottom level, and I think could be helpful for future discussion. So the main conclusion concerning this usage of 10-level model for harmonization of statistical and geodesy reference framework, we have to focus on these question marks in the proposed model. I mean, lack of grid on the geodesy side, because geodesy people don't like a grid at all. For what? And lack of linear object on statistical side, because we don't use a statistical line statistics. Now we start to do it. For example, how many people living 1 kilometer from main roads suffering for something? It is line statistics. And this question marks should be a subject of intensive work in order to break down existing barriers and a starting point to make practical progress in the methodology of combining spatial data with statistical data, with particular emphasis of the specific environment phenomena. And common aim of geostatistical research is develop of geostatistical division framework for official statistics with respect of the geographic division to harmonize these two systems and make this both system more useful for dissemination of statistical data. They are not Poland by night. This is a population distribution in 1 kilometer grid. It is something new what we developed in Europe. And 1 kilometer grid is very suitable for all statistical data which we can disseminate regardless of administrative boundaries. There are 1 kilometer grid for Warsaw City. And how we doing it? Because we collect in Poland, not only in Poland, but in Europe and other countries, as I learned in this conference, all unit data are linked to XY coordinates. It means that if we divide territory, for example, in 1 kilometer grid, it is possible to another size of cell. And we aggregate this statistical phenomena in this grid and color according to density of this phenomena. Finally, it is very easy to aggregate in any borders or administrative borders, different level, layer, finally on the whole country layer. Because the same methodology we used in the in other countries of EU, we finally achieve such population distribution for almost all EU countries. And the same approach is conducted by Columbia University, so we also very easy can achieve such information about population density for the whole globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janusz. So what you've heard so far is, come along, Clint, sorry. So what you've heard so far is examples of what's happening in a variety of statistical organizations or regionally for statistical organizations. Clearly, as time has gone on, some of those capabilities are not possible without support from the private sector in terms of helping to make those technologies, expose those technologies and make them practical. So I'd like Clint to give us a little heads up in terms of
thank you very much, Tim. And thanks to the panel. And I'd like to start by, I'd like to make a confession. I'm a recovering statistician, 30 years sober. But actually, more seriously, this is an interesting and remarkable panel, and I think the audience is full of people who the entire geospatial community in the world owes a debt of gratitude to. I think the data that is built in every country, it's kind of remarkable to just reflect on what's been talked about. You know, you think about imagery and remote sensing, the sensing of the world. You can just point a sensor at a location, you have the location, you collect a bunch of data, but the census is something different. There's so much work and intelligence and strategy that goes into planning how to collect the data and how to report the data. That process of collection and processing and then dissemination is a big part of what you all do. And the layers that you create come to life in GISs now around the world. 350,000 organizations roughly globally are leveraging your kind of the synthesis and the kind of combination of the data that statistical organizations have built. And there's so much of our economy, so much of our governance, so much of what we want to do as societies and people that rely on the information that you guys build. And I just think that's absolutely fascinating. If you think about census and the data that comes with that geography, it's it's kind of man-made and man-assembled. It's your brains and your intellect and your ideas that have kind of come to life in a lot of these maps. Yeah, there's the kind of framework of the infrastructure, roads and so on. You can see boundaries, you can see cadastral, but that kind of layer of census and demographic information is foundational to virtually every GIS application and geospatial application that's being used out there. One of the things about commercial technology, if you just think about collection, processing, and dissemination, GIS is used quite heavily across all of those. I think it's worth mentioning that in the collection aspect, now with our smartphones and devices that we can take into the field, there's a lot of new development that's going on with field GIS applications. For example, there's an application that we have called Survey 123. The genesis of it came out of the Ebola crisis and working with the World Health Organization, but many of your organizations are starting to apply these field GIS tools. Now we can track where census takers go, where they've been. And we can take that data and instead of filling out paper forms and going through a lot of processing that's mistake prone and requires additional kinds of validation cycles, data can be collected digitally, be brought into systems, and then start to synthesize and process using more automated approaches. Meanwhile, with new navigation maps that have been provided by the geospatial community, a lot of the work of census workers, how you assign people and orchestrate workers in the field, can be optimized through logistics and routing. These are the same tools that shipping companies and transportation agencies, train companies and so on use around the world to optimize their routing and their deliveries. Some companies save as much as 20% of their costs by optimizing that work. And that same thing is beginning to happen in a lot of your agencies for how you optimize your data collection efforts in the world. So I think those things are really interesting. I also was thinking a little bit about new kinds of data that are starting to be collected and that you guys are thinking about, and it's worth mentioning because I'd really like to encourage all of us to be thinking about the new opportunities that are available to us. We collect data about where people live, we collect data about business and so on, but these new measures like daytime populations, there's such a large proportion of the global population that's moving into cities, and what happens in a lot of our cities is that commuter activity that happens where daytime populations swell to a certain level, and it's that idea of how do we begin to model movement of people and to know where people are at. It's kind of interesting if you think about some of the applications that we're seeing now that we weren't 10 years ago. And it's kind of the cadence of doing a census. It's always really interesting at these various times to just look at what's happening. And one of the big ones are new kinds of measures, like how can this demographic data, the kind of foundational data that you guys collect, can be used. Like a lot of work is being done these days on vulnerable populations and how to respond in disasters. For example, in the United States last fall, during the hurricanes along the Texas coast around Houston, how do you know where people are and how do you get help to them? And I think those approaches will start to be adopted more broadly. And I think, you know, just back to what you guys provide into this larger, actually very large community is absolutely fascinating. And Tim, I really liked your comparison to kind of war efforts. They're very, very similar, and it never occurred to me that it's kind of how you guys work. It's, I'm just in awe of that. It's remarkable of these days of how that data can come together in these systems and to be used. I just want to mention one other thing. We do have a modernization program for statistical agencies. I suspect that most of you know about those programs, but if you don't, Linda Peters is probably somewhere out there in the dark audience. But she's the person to contact at ESRI if you want to learn more about that program. So I'll just close by thanking all of you on the panel for your work, and for those of you in the audience. The geospatial community, and it's not just Esri, that's the entire geospatial community, owes all of your agencies and all of you a debt of gratitude for your incredible work and what you've been able to do to enable geospatial applications throughout the world. And I think, you know, what's happening is we're being more instrumented, getting more digital. That's just going to continue to grow. So we're really excited about that and very thankful for the work you guys have done. Thanks.
So I'm going to require that our panel earn their right to their break. And so we're going to ask them we're going to start off with a tough question, I think, in a sense. This has to do with data dissemination. So you've heard a fair amount about all the efforts, the plans, the technology to actually collect the data and ensure that we are counting everyone once, only once, and in the right place. But the census has limited value if the results of the census cannot be shared. So I really want to shift gears a little bit to the data dissemination side. Offering statistical data at various levels of geography that meets the growing interests and needs of the user community can be quite a challenge. So for example, if you're putting out national level statistics, that's straightforward. If you're trying to get to the neighborhood level where it's really helpful for neighborhood planning, that's a different set of circumstances. So in order to be able to do that, and in order to be able to do it in such a way that it's easy to do, that it's transparent almost for the user to participate, it requires the concept of data interoperability. And this topic has been talked about during the World Data Forum. It's not only interoperability of the data, but it's also interoperability of the functions that have to occur, as well as the products that are at the heart of that service and exercise. So there have been challenges in data interoperability, and I break them down into really three categories. One is about data definition. So if you take, for example, the SDGs and you look at SDG number 1 on poverty, what's the definition of poverty? Well, there may be more than one definition, even within a single organization, based on the needs or use of that data. And if you extrapolate that then to the entire world, you can see the complexity with which we're faced with in trying to come up with a common definition. The same is true on the geospatial side. We have challenges on definitions of aspects of the geospatial work. So what do we mean by these things? That's the definition. The second thing is common geography. And you saw in Janusz's presentation common geography. So a common geography, for example, is the boundaries of the nation. Well, okay, we've got that. There's some conflict between a few, but that's set. What about the next level? And what about the next level? And what about the next level? I can assure you that common geography at the neighborhood level or slightly above that level doesn't exist across the world. Rarely does it exist from one nation to its borders or bordering nations. So is there something that we can do to come up with common units? One option is to take a gridded approach. And the question there is the grid satisfactory to answer your questions as from a user perspective, from the use case? And the last one has to do with technical requirements. So really today, if you want to combine geography and statistics, it's not always transparent. It's not always simple. You may actually have to perform a function. You actually may have to take action on that data to make that possible. Really what you want at the end of the day is to be able to do that automatically. You don't want to have to go through that exercise times the number of users. So what is it that has to occur in order for that to be helpful? So to the panel, from your perspective, what's needed for us in the geospatial community and as well to the statistical community? What is necessary for us to make progress on that? Jim, I'll start with you, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tim. So I'd like to bring us back to the Yannis's presentation and the triangle that he put forward there. So several years ago, the statistical and the geospatial community, the statistical community through the United Nations Statistical Commission, the geospatial community through the UN GGIM, we put together a joint working group, expert group that developed that framework which Yannis put up there. And I'd like to sort of remind people what Yannis said there. A lot of things at the top of that pyramid is let's get a geo portal and just put the data out in a really, very visually appealing way. But to have trust in what you're putting out there and enable this interoperability, to enable the coherence of the story, and to enable the story to be repeated more than once, the framework takes you right down to that foundational piece at the bottom around common definitions, common units, common boundaries, interoperable metadata. And at the top we have common methods around how to confidentialise, how to report on the data. So I think I'd like to respond to Tim to say that, yes, these are three dissemination challenges: definitions, technology, and common geography. But both communities are working together on these. We've recognised them, and actually we have one of the only joint expert groups that reports simultaneously to both the UN GGIM and to the United Nations Statistical Community to address these issues. So to me, yes, they're issues, we know about them, and there's quite a lot of people, experts working around the world to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. And Bernard, from Uganda's perspective and your experience on the SDG working group, what would you have to add to that?
Thank you, Tim. The challenges are real because the sessions having been originally every other area doing its stuff. But now the reason for us working together, the documentations and also all these committees, like our colleague has mentioned, I think we see them doing a lot of good pilot work and also a lot of tests in the different countries. And the methodologies and the definitions are getting much, much better. The conversation has started already, and there's still room for improvement in many little small areas. The agreement, situations of those common geographies, and like they said, 1-1, where 2 kilometers, and from the transport road, a good system or whether they are still, even when you run them, you still find a lot of gray areas where the information that comes from either side becoming a little bit different. But I think along the way, we have found that when we work together and you continue to reason out and you see the lowest level in which the plus or minus could be acceptable, there are a lot of improvements. So my suggestion and my submission is that the discussions can continue and the meetings can continue and the definitions can continue as we continue to understand one another from either each area's perspective. We seem to be also causing common statistical geographies, if you may call it. And we also have a compendium at the Bureau of Statistics. Also, we are revisiting the indicators and the definitions, and also understanding the purpose for what and for which these indicators and these data sets we are to achieve. Through that also, there is a need to rethink again about what we used to do and how we used to do it, but also in this common framework, what we can do better and what would serve the purpose of where we are going. Thank you.
Thank you. So Janusz, you've been working on models for integrating data and for data interoperability for quite a long time now. What are the stumbling blocks? I mean, why aren't we there yet?
Good question. And we discuss a lot these matters, as I said, during last 10 years. And from my point, I think that the exchange of knowledge between statistical and geospatial society community is very crucial, because we're sometimes talking about the same issues, but our meaning is different. And this is the reason that we're still discussing blah, 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 and trying to be very intelligent. But finally, we're suffering for lack of use cases. Use cases for politicians, for decision makers, and I believe that after a linking of statistical data with spatial data, we achieve added value of our data. We will be able to find new insights in data, in statistical data. And I believe also that only one limitation of such approach and development is only our imagination.
Very good. Thank you. Clint, you know, if we were to, for those of us who have been around a bit, decades ago we were talking about the notion of metadata and how important that is to, in effect, take the place of the old data dictionaries and to more than just describe the data, really have some level of, if I can use the word sparingly, intelligence to the data. As we move, and we know that from the metadata experience today, while we didn't really see it quite that way, metadata is driving software, it's driving systems, all in the background where we're not touching that. That information is actually driving those processes. On data interoperability, I see a similar parallel vein, if you will. Can you say something about that in terms of where you think this might help us in the future and from a data use perspective?
This kind of fascinating and remarkable conversation. Metadata, first of all, just a few comments about that, is always crucial, always was crucial, will be even more so as data sharing happens. And all of us are opening up. I'm not saying that we share all of our data, but we do share specific data in appropriate ways with appropriate partners. And that framework requires that we have strong documentation about that data. The geospatial community, even back as early as probably 1990, was talking about this, and open data was always a thing. Here's what goes on in the geospatial community. Everybody needs somebody else's data for something. And it's real easy because layers all reference onto the surface of the earth. So understanding details about that data, how it was assembled, what the sources are, you know, those kinds of things that help you make appropriate use of the data has always been critical, and it remains so. These days, there are catalogs, there are portals, right? We've talked this week about geospatial portals. FCSA has built one for the country here. The United Nations talked about their SDG.org portal. All of those have catalogs. Those catalogs have short kind of abstracts about all of the items of information that are being shared, but those abstracts can also point to the richer, more deep metadata about the methodologies and so on, about how the data is collected. And that's very important, I think, to this audience. That's number one, is good documentation is an absolute necessity to use this information in appropriate ways. The second thing that's going on, and it's been really interesting this week, a lot of us that work at Esri have been talking about this, is we're just starting to enter the era of what we call web GIS. And you can think of all the information items there are in a web GIS. That information item might sit in an enterprise server behind a firewall, and it might be that an organization decides they want to share that data, and they'll drill a hole in their firewall and serve it out. And then the other thing that's happening a lot is cloud, and people posting information items into the cloud. What's going on is every one of those items ends up having a URL, just like a web page. How do you go visit fcsa.org? Well, you use the URL, right? That same thing is happening for all data items in the world. For example, most of you, I'm sure, know about OpenStreetMap. There's an OpenStreetMap URL for the OpenStreetMap database. And I'm not going to comment at all about the robustness of that data versus the approaches that you guys use, because it's got a totally different purpose. But the idea that everybody can go to that URL and access that data is very interesting. For example, at ESRI, we have some mapping techniques that we use. It's something called vector-based maps. We've built a vector-based map of the world. We harvest data out of that and build what we call a vector map cache, and that vector map cache is being updated multiple times every day. But that map cache is sitting as a web service, just like the OpenStreetMap data is sitting as a web service. And what we're starting to see, like in the FCSA system and in the UN system for SDGs, each of the items that are being published by your organizations, and once you know that URL, it's really easy to use that. You can write open source code like Python scripts or R scripts to run against that. You can write JavaScript code to run against that. You can write all these kind of new ways to use data. And this is a remarkable development that's taking place. And I think what's going to happen is the demand and the interest in using the data that you guys decide to share is going to be really important. And I would just say one of the takeaways from the conference should be that if you aren't aware about that idea of how these kind of web services interfaces work, it's really worthwhile begin to learn about that. And you can do that by going to the UN organization. It's www.sdg.org. And just start to work with that catalog and see what you can do to start to understand that in a more clear way. Here in Dubai, you can go to the fcsa.org site that they're showing next door. And if you haven't seen their work, I'd encourage you to definitely take a look at it. it's really interesting. And there's a lot to learn about that, but I will just say that idea that a data set becomes a web service that can be published that has a URL is the ultimate definition of open. And it doesn't matter if the data is built with proprietary systems or not. What's happening is people are able to take those URLs and do remarkable things with them. This week, there's a lot of really interesting open source developers that are here that are just excited as can be about the work they're doing. There's groups like CSUN that, you know, kind of harvest our data in and so on. I would say that's a big thing to be learning about.
Thanks. So I'm very mindful of the time. I want to ask one more question of the panel, but I also want to ask one question of you as you leave for the break. So I'm going to ask for very short, curt answers. Earth observation data has been around since the 1970s, but it really is coming into its own for census and SDG and statistical applications now. Before, it had a very limited use. Anyone, do you want to share an example of how you are using or planning to use Earth observation data to, as part of this data integration process and data ecosystem that we have been talking about? Go ahead.
Sure. So in my, Yannis has just talked about use cases. I think what we've seen is lots of very positive examples of the use of geospatial data in censuses. All of us have modernised our census operations and are using GIS data, GIS skills, GIS information systems. To me, the SDG Agenda 2030, gives us an opportunity and is giving all of the official statistical community opportunity to make use of geospatial information for the production of statistics. And let's just take Earth observations in particular. I know that the UN Environment is using Earth observations data for some of the water extent data. In Australia, we actually used Earth observations data for the production of land accounts, environmental accounts based on land. And this was a real example of you bringing together the Earth observations data with the statistical data and the statistical community to produce an environmental economic account based on land. And I think the Agenda 2030, I posed the question earlier about where are the live examples of using Earth observations or remote sensing data for the production of our Sustainable Development Goals. And I think what we need to do now is share some of these real examples of where it has been used, not in the production of statistics, but in the dissemination and compilation of them. Thank you.
So one of the things that I'd like to, I still have that question I want to ask you, but one of the things I want to leave you with as well is that continually think about how you can exploit the data and the technology that's before you. So for example, in Earth observation information, in the United States, we're using that to match against our address list. We collected GPS points in 2010. We're using those locations with the addresses to know whether or not we have to go back out to the field to check that address list, because that's the frame for the census. That's the statistical frame for the census. So it's critical that we get that right. And that's an example of how we're using Earth observation data to save time and to save a lot of money. Okay. Now here's your challenge. The 2020 round of censuses is really, for all practical purposes, the last major opportunity you're going to have to collect data to support the SDGs. So the question is, what are you doing about that? Are you ensuring that your census includes questions or information that's going to help you reach those SDG indicators? And if it's not, should it? So think about that, and as you go out for your break, have that conversation. At this time, I'd like to thank our panel. I think that it's been very diverse, very broad topics, but I think that it's been helpful to all of us. I know I learned quite a bit sitting here today. So thank you very much. Thanks, team.